Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of RPG Radio. My name is Winback and on today's episode of Grimdawn we're playing a build I have been waiting to do for a while and just actually remembered that I wanted to do it very recently. So this is my first attempt at an actual spin build. We're using an Oathkeeper and a Demolitionist to get this done. And the class is known as a shield breaker. Currently, the build is very simple, and it's all geared around spinning into lots of enemies, doing a lot of damage to them with your spin, and having them do a lot of damage to themselves when they attack you. Being that we're Oathkeeper focused on this go round, things are actually very easy to do when the enemies hit you and you deal damage back to them. So given that this is the first episode in this build, we're actually just going to be talking about leveling, how to get the right skills, where the points should go, and some early kind of stuff. I will be completely honest with you, this build actually just steamrolls everything in the normal difficulty. I've only had one death so far, and that's just because I wasn't paying attention, looking off to the side, watching some mind-rotting YouTube stuff, and mindlessly clicking into a whole group of enemies who actually had a little bit of damage on me. So that is your only real concern when it comes to leveling this build. What you're going to want to do first, more than anything else, is put all of your points into the spinning skill, which is called Eye of Reckoning on the Oathkeeper tree. This is fairly far down the Oathkeeper side of things, so you'll want to pump a ton of points into that mastery bar to get Eye of Reckoning as quick as possible. And once you have it, you're going to need to start working on getting your energy stores up pretty decently as well, because you want to be spinning for quite a while and you don't want to have an empty energy reserve really bothering you when it comes to holding the button down and moving around. Now, your big damage types when it comes to Eye of Reckoning are going to be physical and fire. This is also going to be doing some of your weapon damage, but mostly it's going to be physical and fire type damage. So the type of gear that you find in order to supplement that type of damage is going to be really important, meaning that once you make it to Act 7, you're going to want to go all the way up to Act 7 with this build. There are a lot of items, monster infrequents specifically, in this act that are very good for the Oathkeeper, and specifically very good for Eye of Reckoning. So we actually have a monster infrequent on right now from one of the raptor type enemies that is putting even more physical damage into our kit through, I think it's Presence of Virtue. I'll have to take a look at that. But the gear isn't as important as the ability itself. So getting up to Act 7, you'll find those items and you'll want to swap them out, but up until that point, really all you have to worry about is just the straight up damage that you can do with Eye of Reckoning and some of the other passives going into the Oathkeeper kit. So, that being said, there is also a single modifier for Eye of Reckoning called Soulfire. This is going to add physical and lightning damage to your Eye of Reckoning, and you can see these little spinning lightning balls that will come out while you're hitting enemies with Eye of Reckoning. So those do their own type of damage. They reduce the damage that enemies do when they get hit, and they happen fairly frequently. But since the spinning ability in this game is very simple, it is going to be very easy to build around it. The good news is that it basically acts like the melee version of an Aether Ray or any other laser ability in an action RPG that you've ever seen before, in that it is just a button you're going to hold down and move with it, dealing damage. Unlike Aether Ray, it's actually fun. You know, let's just put that caveat on it right now. Anything melee is always going to be more fun than ranged. So that's just, I don't need any comments in the comment section about that. We can all agree. I'm sure we're all sane people who know just exactly that fact. So let's move on then. As far as the rest of the build goes, there are going to be a lot of passive functions that help Eye of Reckoning deal more damage. So there's a couple actives as well. They don't take a huge part of the skill point distribution in normal. However, in the normal difficulty, Vire's Might and Judgment are basically just added movement and a bit of AoE gathering for your Eye of Reckoning. However, the more movement speed that you get, the less that you're going to need Judgment, so it's a little bit awkward, to say the least. Judgment, you have to stand still, you have to stop channeling your Eye of Reckoning to use, so it's kind of like, is this really worth it? I don't know. We'll see if it survives through to the next video, but as it stands right now, Judgment is, it's fairly moderate use, whereas Eye of Reckoning is all the time instantaneous use. Hit the button as much as you possibly can. But other than that, Vire's Might is especially useful because you can dive into groups of enemies and then start using your spin, rather than using your spin first and slowly moving your way over to enemies. Movement speed helps with getting you in place for Eye of Reckoning, but Vire's Might is, it's a point and click, you don't need a target, you go where you want to and you start spinning, which is how you want things to work. If you have to waste more time spinning on nothing, you're using more energy, that's not fun, and obviously you don't want to deal with that at all. Also, crowd control is a real big problem for spin builds that I'm noticing. Being frozen, being stunned, being rooted isn't as bad, but those other ones, the hard CCs, are especially painful when it comes to maximum spinach. just like Popeye, grow up big and strong. Anyway, back to what we were talking about, which was passives. So the first really big passive that you're going to want to take on the Oathkeeper side of things is called Safeguard. Now, this is a pretty unassuming passive, but what this is doing, when you have your shield equipped, you're getting flat physical damage, you're getting a buff to all damage, and you're getting flat armor. This is going to help your Eye of Reckoning damage astronomically because it's all flat damage and it's all just built into your kit. It is incredibly helpful, and you'll want to get this one maxed out probably after you max out your Eye of Reckoning. You don't have to max out Soulfire, but you'll max Eye of Reckoning, and then you'll max Safeguard with your, couple of points into Vire's Might, Judgment, and so on. After you get Safeguard done, move over to Presence of Virtue. You only need 1 point into Presence itself, and then Haven, which is the next modifier in the chain. After that, though, your big one is going to be Rebuke. Rebuke is also going to add some more physical flat damage to your kit, which I don't think I need to explain again is very good. On top of putting more damage on your Eye of Reckoning, it's also giving you reductions to life. It's giving you resistances to life reduction, there we go, and reflected damage. So those things are fairly important when going up against bosses or percent health enemies that can chunk you really, really hard. On top of that, you're also getting a buff to all of your retaliation damage. So this is the whole reason to take Presence of Virtue, along with some modifiers on monster infrequents that really help out. Really, again, you only need 1 point into your Presence of Virtue itself, and then 1 into Haven, and then everything else into Rebuke. Get that bad boy chubbed up quick. Lastly, you've got Divine Mandate. That's going to be the big passive on your Oathkeeper side of things. You really only have to get this up to about 7 or so, I'd say. And that is going to give you internal trauma damage, crit damage. It's going to buff your physical and fire, and give you some slow resistance as well. Slow resistance, super good for maintaining maximum spin speed, but getting that damage buff and the crit damage as well is going to be pretty optimal for your spinitude. So eventually you can max that out. As far as all things are considered though, 7 points is probably good enough in normal to really keep things, you know, copacetic. You'll also want to put at least 1 point into resilience, because the resilience effect is, it's decent. Getting physical resistance and increases to maximum resistances is very, very useful. Probably not as useful in normal. This is why we only got 1 point in it. But once we get into ultimate, that physical resistance is going to be incredibly good, and it does activate once the character starts getting in trouble. The other button that you're going to want to take on the Oathkeeper side of things is your Ascension button. This is an activatable passive, essentially. So you're going to kick it on. It goes for 10 seconds. It's going to give you a damage absorption shield and fire retaliation, as well as buffing your other retaliation damage. And then Clarity of Purpose, which is the modifier for it, is also going to give you a jump in offensive ability, which is about 4% at level 1. And it's going to give you a 100% resistance to life and energy leech that enemies are going to try to hit you with while you're spinning. I don't think I need to mention it again, but you know, that's a theme in this video. So given that losing energy from bad guys is a very bad thing, having a 100% resistance to it is very important. So basically, your energy bar will be completely protected while you are under the effects of Ascension. Again, that's another like 1 point, 2 point kind of thing. You don't have to max that out early on. It'll be more important in the higher difficulties, but you do want to have it, at least get used to the fact that the button is there to be pressed. Now let's talk about the Demolitionist masteries, because this class isn't useless in this build. It's actually got a lot of different things going on that are going to take care of us in the interim, or just being hit by enemy abilities. So the most important one, I think, in relation to the Oathkeeper side of things, is going to be Vindictive Flame. Vindictive Flame is a passive that you're going to toggle, and this is going to give you it's going to give you physical damage, fire damage, and a chance to stun the target at about 30%. The stun isn't ultimately what we're after. Really, what we want is the damage. Basically, when you get hit with Vindictive Flame, you are going to deal that physical and fire damage in an AoE around yourself, and that's on about a 2-second cooldown. So it's a big AoE retaliatory passive that you're going to be using, and its modifier is incredibly helpful as well. This, it's called Ulzwin's Wrath. It's going to basically fire off lightning bolts when your Vindictive Flame goes off as well. That is going to use some of your retaliation damage. It's going to deal fire and lightning damage, and is going to convert some of that damage into health as well. The lightning bolts also knock targets down for 2.5 seconds. So if there are enemies with pretty bad resistances to knockdown, they're going to be laying on the ground for a very long time while you are just blending everything to a fine bloody mist around them. It's actually really good against the Yeti type enemies in Act 5 and Act 4. Act 4 and Act 5. Because you can knock them down for basically their entire health bar. They're not dealing damage to you, they're just laying on the ground eating the entire Eye of Reckoning. It's really cool, actually. The other passives on the Demolitionist tree that we want at least 1 point into Blast Shield for the damage absorbing shield, the chance to avoid projectiles and those resistances, along with some more fire retaliation. Retaliation just being very good for every Oathkeeper build, period. And then, more importantly, is our Flame Touched ability. You want to take 1 point into the ability just to get it going. It gives you some flat fire damage and offensive ability, which is good, but it won't be super important early on because we're already doing obscene amounts of damage. Next, though, is Temper. Temper is going to give you a lot of physical damage, defensive ability, and retaliation damage buffs. This is the one that you want to put all the points in, because chances are you may have a good chunk of gear with temper stats on them too. So 1, 2 to maybe 5 or 6 points into this ability will get it very high, meaning that your physical damage on your Eye of Reckoning will also get that much higher. It is absolutely wonderful. Really, really good stuff. There are also other passives going on our bar, but that's just burning weapons. That's what it's called. That you'll get from your enchanted flint. That's just a component that you'll slap on your weapon, and that gives you more fire damage on top of everything else. So you'll equip the enchanted flint, turn on burning weapons, and get yourself some buffed fire damage. Once we get to level 75, we can put seals on the weapon, but until that time, enchanted flint really just feels like the best option. Gives you another passive, really scales up pretty decently with the rest of this build, and you can consider that a win. So, all things considered, there are a lot of sources going into the passive retaliation part of this build, and the damage being funneled back into other offensive skills as well. I say offensive skills, I just mean skills that are dealing damage to enemies, not necessarily buttons that we're going to be using, because basically, if you've been keeping up with the video at all right now, Eye of Reckoning is the only real button that we need. So all of this other stuff is just to support Eye of Reckoning, to support our character when they get hit, which is pretty often because you'll be in the middle of so many enemies, spinning and winning and having a phenomenal time. Some gear options I would also recommend early on if you can get to them. Your level 50 that I'm having a good time with right now is the Dread Mask of Gurgoth. This doesn't have any points into abilities that we're using right now, but Lightning Bolt is incredibly impactful, and it's also giving us some pretty good resistances to elemental damage, as well as reduced stun duration and reduced cooldown time. Not to mention that the energy regen is always welcome. We're going to need a lot of that as the game progresses, because our energy bar does run pretty low pretty often. Also, from Act 5, you're going to want to pick up a Colossal Fortress. Those are the shields that you get from some of the big ethereal brutes. You'll want specifically this one because this one gives you changes to Vindictive Flame. Mainly, it's going to reduce the skill recharge, increase the target meter area, and you're going to get additional fire damage to it as well. If you are lucky enough to get some Golem-born Greaves, you can get these for level 50. They're incredibly helpful stats-wise. Defensively, they're going to give you points into Temper, which is very good for the damage for Eye of Reckoning, and Golem-born is another defensive ability with a 25% chance to activate, giving you a whole bunch of armor and internal trauma retaliation, as well as reduced attack speed retaliation. So kind of a goofy retaliation there, but still very helpful. Very, very good boots for defensive options. As far as relics go, you'll want to pick up Endurance early on. Endurance is pretty attainable, and you can use it starting from level 35. Before this, relic options, I mean, they're kind of up to you. It's pretty easy to figure out what you want to do, but Endurance is going to carry you all the way to level 60 when you can pick up Citadel, which we'll talk about in the next video. But as far as Endurance goes, you get physical fire damage, you get health, you get physical resistance from it, which is kind of not great for, normal, and since we're not going to be using it in Ultimate, it's kind of whatever. But more importantly, it's going to give you 1 to all skills in Oathkeeper and a very useful passive called Flame Burst. So you have a 30% chance when you get hit to fire up some physical fire and burn damage around your character in a 10-meter range with a 1-second cooldown. This build has the opportunity to pick up a lot of gear that has these passive abilities on them. So either that they activate when you are hitting the enemy, or they activate when the enemy hits you. Those types of things are very good because Eye of Reckoning hits a lot, and you can get hit a lot while using Eye of Reckoning, meaning that those passives are going to deal a good amount of damage, or they're going to activate more consistently than they would with a character who's trying to avoid getting hit or trying to play at range more often than your typical spinster. So all that considered, the endurance relic is nice and easy, but again, that's going to upgrade in the next video. That is it for this build though, everybody. At least for the normal side of things, all you really have to worry about are those maybe 1 or 2 pieces of gear, and more importantly, your masteries, your abilities. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'll be back next time to continue down through Elite with the Shield Breaker, but I'll see you all then. Peace out, everybody.
Put it to good use.